Welcome to Golden Era History. Tonight we pull back the velvet curtain of Hollywood's golden age, not to admire the glitter, but to confront the devastating shadows it cast. We celebrate the iconic faces, the timeless films, and the legends that defined an epoch. But what of the cost? Beneath the studio-managed smiles and the dazzling marquee lights festered a profound, often silent suffering. The pressure to maintain a perfect image, the brutal control of the studio system, the fickle nature of fame, and personal demons led some of the most luminous stars to the brink. This is not a video to sensationalize tragedy, but to interrogate the dark underside of the dream factory. We will delve into the stories of over 15 stars who, in moments of utter desperation, attempted to take their own lives. These were not tabloid figures of a later era, but the very pillars of classic cinema. The actors and actresses whose faces sold millions of tickets. Their stories reveal a haunting truth, that in the gilded cage of Hollywood's golden age, the brightest lights often burned with the most searing pain. Judy Garland. The archetype of the studio system's casualty, Judy Garland's life was a relentless cycle of manufactured brilliance and profound personal collapse. From childhood, MGM weaponized her extraordinary talent while systematically destroying her self-worth. She was placed on brutal amphetamine and barbiturate regimens by studio doctors to control her weight and work schedule, creating a lifelong addiction before she was 20. The little girl voice and vulnerability that made her so beloved as Dorothy were the very traits the moguls exploited, while simultaneously berating her appearance. Her suicide attempts were protracted cries for help against this psychic torture. In 1950, after being suspended by MGM, she slashed her throat slightly with a broken glass. A more serious attempt occurred in 1964, with an overdose following a period of professional turmoil and ill health. Garland's struggle was against the very identity crafted for her. She was perpetually mourning the normal childhood she never had. Her later concert years, while showcasing her indomitable spirit, were also a public performance of survival from profound trauma. Her story is the foundational tragedy of the Golden Age, illustrating how the machine could build an icon and systematically dismantle a human being. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's 1962 death is one of history's most dissected tragedies, but it was the culmination of a long, private history of suicide attempts that reveal her profound anguish. Far from the careless, dumb blonde, Monroe was a deeply sensitive woman plagued by chronic depression, anxiety, and likely bipolar disorder. Her childhood of abandonment and foster homes created a wound that fame could never heal. It only amplified her feeling of being an imposter and object. During the filming of Some Like It Hot in 1958, in the throes of a sleeping pill addiction and a crumbling marriage to Arthur Miller, she ingested a near-fatal overdose of barbiturates, requiring stomach pumping. This was a direct response to what she called that feeling of terrible loneliness and fear. The attempts were desperate signals from a woman who felt increasingly trapped between the studio's caricature, the intellectual community's skepticism, and her own spiraling mental health. Her final years were a maze of unreliable psychiatrists, exploitative associates, and debilitating self-doubt. Monroe's story is the ultimate paradox, the creation of a goddess of love and sex who died from a lack of genuine, stabilizing love herself. Ernest Hemingway. While primarily a literary giant, Ernest Hemingway was a celebrity of the Golden Age, his persona of hyper-masculine adventure integral to the era's culture. His suicide in 1961 was the final act in a series of attempts against a backdrop of mental and physical collapse. Hemingway suffered from what would now be recognized as severe depression, paranoid delusions. He was convinced the FBI was surveilling him, which was partially true, and the ravages of a lifetime of injuries. His mind, his most treasured tool, was failing. In April 1961, shortly after 2 courses of electroconvulsive therapy at the Mayo Clinic, he attempted to kill himself by moving toward a loaded shotgun. He was hospitalized again. On July 2, 1961, at his home in Ketchum, Idaho, he succeeded. Hemingway's attempts were not cries for help, but strategic actions by a man who believed, as he wrote, that he had lost the archives of his memory and could no longer be who he was. His death forced a reckoning with the destructive weight of a self-made legend, proving that even the strongest facade could hide irreparable fracture. Carole Landis, the vibrant GI's sweetheart, known for her energetic USO tours and sunny film roles, Carole Landis hid a world of romantic despair. Her career at Fox had plateaued, and her personal life was a series of disappointments, including 4 failed marriages. Her great, unrequited love was for the married, emotionally withholding Rex Harrison. On the night of July 4, 1948, after a final, tense dinner with Harrison at her Pacific Palisades home, the 29-year-old actress wrote several suicide notes. One to her mother read, "I'm sorry, really sorry, to put you through this, but there is no way to avoid it." She then died from an overdose of secobarbital. Landis's death shattered the bubbly image she was contractually obligated to project. It exposed the precarious position of a studio starlet whose value was tied to youth and marital availability, and the devastating emotional cost when private life failed to match the public fantasy. Alan Ladd, the epitome of the cool, contained Hollywood tough guy in films like Shane, Alan Ladd's success was haunted by profound insecurity and depression. His shortness, 5'6", was a source of intense private shame, leading to elaborate filming techniques to mask it. His childhood was marked by poverty and trauma. He believed his mother died by suicide. Ladd struggled with alcoholism and insomnia, and as his career waned in the early 1960s, his despair deepened. In 1962, he shot himself in the chest, but survived. The incident was largely hushed up, a testament to the old studio system's ability to conceal scandals. Ladd's attempt speaks to the fragile masculinity of the Hollywood hero, where the pressure to embody an unshakable ideal could crush a man who felt physically and emotionally inadequate. Gene Tierney, the radiant star of Laura, and Leave Her to Heaven. Gene Tierney's beauty and talent belied a life stalked by tragedy. Her greatest heartbreak came when, while pregnant, she contracted rubella from a fan who broke quarantine to meet her at the Hollywood canteen. Her daughter, Daria, was born severely disabled. The guilt and grief consumed Tierney, contributing to a mental breakdown. Diagnosed with what was then called manic depression, bipolar disorder, she endured a series of brutal electroshock treatments that erased months of her memory. In 1957, overwhelmed by her condition and the failure of her marriage to Oleg Cassini, she attempted suicide by swallowing a massive dose of sleeping pills. She was found and resuscitated. Tierney's story is a tragic collision of Hollywood glamour with unbearable personal loss and a stark indictment of the era's crude psychiatric treatments, which often worsened the pain they sought to cure. Vincent Price. Best known later for his horror film persona, Vincent Price was a sophisticated leading man and art historian in the Golden Age. In 1948, at the height of his career, he attempted suicide. The cause was profound personal shame and fear. Price was secretly bisexual, and a blackmailer was threatening to expose his relationships with men. Trapped between his public image as a respectable star and the threat of career annihilation in a brutally intolerant era, he saw no way out. He attempted to gas himself in his garage. He survived, and the blackmailer was eventually prosecuted, but the incident forced Price into a more guarded existence. His story reveals the terror faced by LGBTQ+ stars in a relentlessly heterosexual, image-obsessed industry, where the price of fame could be one's very identity. Frances Farmer. The story of Frances Farmer is one of the most brutal, cautionary tales of Hollywood rebellion. A fiercely intelligent and talented actress from Seattle, she openly scorned the studio system's publicity rituals, earning a reputation as difficult. After a series of arrests for drunkenness and a famous traffic violation where she allegedly assaulted a policeman, Farmer's life spiraled. Her mother, controlling and deeply disapproving of her lifestyle, had her committed to a psychiatric institution in 1944. For years, Farmer endured the horrors of mid-century asylums, ice baths, straitjackets, sexual assault, and insulin shock therapy. In desperation, she attempted suicide multiple times within the institutions, once by swallowing disinfectant. Her 1958 autobiography, Will There Really Be a Morning?, detailed the atrocities. Farmer's attempts were not just cries of personal pain, but acts of defiance against a system, familial, judicial, and medical, that sought to punish and break a nonconformist woman. Mickey Rooney, the quintessential all-American energetic performer, Mickey Rooney's life off-screen was a maelstrom of financial ruin and personal turmoil. The highest-paid star of the late 1930s and early 40s, he lost millions through bad investments, multiple divorces, 8 in total, and a crippling gambling addiction. By the 1960s, he was bankrupt and struggling to find work. In 1964, overwhelmed by debt and despair, he attempted suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills in a Los Angeles hotel room. He was discovered in time and revived. Rooney's attempt highlights the dramatic flip side of the child star phenomenon, an adult utterly unprepared for financial management or stable relationships, having never known a life outside performance and adulation. His survival led to a remarkable late-life comeback, but his story underscores how quickly the golden boy could be abandoned by the industry that created him. Lupe Vélez. Known as the Mexican Spitfire for her fiery temper and comedic roles, Lupe Vélez's suicide has been grotesquely mythologized, obscuring its true tragedy. In 1944, she was pregnant out of wedlock by her former fiancé, actor Harold Ramson. Deeply Catholic and fearing the scandal would destroy her career, she felt trapped. On the night of December 13th, she meticulously cleaned her Beverly Hills home, arranged flowers, and dressed in a favorite lace gown. She then ingested a large quantity of seconal pills. Contrary to the vulgar legend of a messy death in the toilet, she was found peacefully in bed, having written a note expressing love for Ramson and a wish to spare her unborn child illegitimacy. Vélez's death was a calculated act of shame and preservation, a stark illustration of the devastating moral and professional standards imposed on women, even those with a Spitfire image. Peter Lorre. With his distinctive bulging eyes and whispery voice, Peter Lorre was immortalized as a villain and character actor, but his life was haunted by the shadows of history and addiction. A Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany, he carried the trauma of exile. He also developed a severe morphine addiction in the 1930s to manage pain, an addiction that dogged him for life. In the mid-1940s, as his career hit a rough patch and his addiction raged, Lorre attempted suicide by slashing his wrists. He survived and sought treatment. His struggle was that of the European artist in Hollywood, often typecast, misunderstood, and using substances to dull the pain of displacement and the memory of a world lost to war. Lorre's attempt speaks to the hidden anguish of the immigrant character actor, whose face conveyed menace or mirth, but never his own deep sorrow. Jean Seberg. A bridge to the new Hollywood, Jean Seberg's career began in the late Golden Age with Otto Preminger's Saint Joan. Her tragic end was set in motion by brutal political persecution. In the late 1960s, Seberg, a white actress, became a vocal supporter of the Black Panther Party. In response, the FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, launched a vicious covert campaign to destroy her. They planted false stories in the press claiming the child she was carrying was not by her husband, but by a Black Panther. The story caused international scandal and is believed to have contributed to her premature birth and the infant's death 2 days later. Seberg never recovered from this trauma. She suffered a series of mental breakdowns and attempted suicide multiple times in the following years. In 1979, she succeeded, dying from an overdose of barbiturates. Seberg's attempts were direct results of state-sponsored terrorism against a star who dared to step outside the apolitical starlet role, proving that the pressures on Golden Age figures could come from the highest, most sinister corridors of power. Diana Barrymore. The daughter of the legendary John Barrymore, Diana was born into Hollywood royalty, but inherited a legacy of addiction and instability. Dubbed the Cursed Barrymore, her life was a public struggle to live up to a name she could never escape, while battling severe alcoholism. Her career was sporadic and overshadowed by scandalous behavior. In 1960, after years of public decline and several failed suicide attempts, she was found dead in her New York apartment from an overdose of alcohol and barbiturates, a death ruled accidental but widely seen as the culmination of a long surrender. Diana's story is one of the perils of dynastic fame. the unbearable weight of expectation, and the temptation to use the very vices that destroyed one's parents as a means of escape. Margot Hemingway. Another tragic heir, Margot Hemingway burst onto the 1970s scene as a model and actress, but her story is rooted in the golden age legacy of her grandfather, Ernest. Her life was a battle with the same severe depression that plagued him, compounded by the pressures of sudden fame, epilepsy, and a family history she felt destined to repeat. In 1996, just like her grandfather, she died by suicide from a drug overdose. While her death occurred later, it is a direct, haunting echo of the golden age trauma that flowed through her family. Her story completes a grim circle, demonstrating how the psychological wounds of one era could genetically and environmentally transmit to the next, proving that the golden curse could be inherited. George Sanders. The epitome of sardonic, weary elegance, George Sanders made a career out of playing cultured cads. In a cruel irony, his final act mirrored the world-weariness of his roles. In April 1972, at age 65, checked into a hotel in Castellón, Spain, and deliberately overdosed on Nembutal. He left a suicide note that became infamous for its bleak wit. "Dear world, I am leaving because I am bored. I feel I have lived long enough. I am leaving you with your worries in this sweet cesspool. Good luck." Sanders suffered from depression and was in declining health, but his note suggested a deeper, philosophical nihilism. His suicide was not a cry of pain, but a cold, calculated exit by a man who had seen the world, and Hollywood, and found it wanting. It was the ultimate expression of the disillusionment that could fester behind the most sophisticated, cynical facade. The stories of these 15 stars form a devastating mosaic of the Golden Age's hidden reality. Behind every radiant smile captured on celluloid was a human being vulnerable to despair, addiction, heartbreak, and the immense pressure of sustaining an illusion. Their suicide attempts were not moments of weakness, but logical, if tragic, responses to a world that demanded perfection while offering little genuine support. From the studio-managed torture of Judy Garland to the state-sponsored destruction of Gene Seberg, these tragedies force us to question the very mythology of Hollywood's golden era. It was an age that gave us timeless art, but often at an unconscionable human cost. Remember their stories not just for their endings, but for the brilliance they showed in their living and the unforgiving spotlight in which they suffered. If you found this exploration compelling, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Who else should we remember? Until next time, this is Golden Era History, signing off.